Let's dive deeper into all of this. Jennifer Greigel, Associate Professor of Communications at Syracuse University, also, of course, an expert in social media, been part of our discussion on Bloomberg since the early days of Musk's possible acquisition of Twitter. And chickens coming home to roost in some way, Jennifer?
Yeah, not much has changed. Maybe the gift, though, is that Musk has just made it painfully obvious that it's time to go, especially for those journalists that we were just talking about, right? And I don't know about Kurt. Maybe he watches World Cup, but I am there watching what's happening, within the journalism world, specifically with an eye towards the free press. And maybe it's a good time to step back and remember what that is. It's supposed to be free from the government, right? So when we're thinking about like free speech issues and, what are Elon Musk's rights, like he gets to have his free speech because he owns this. But the rest of us, well, not so much, right? And, the risk, I think, has really proven to be that we cannot have Twitter be at the center of journalism. We don't want some type of, like baron or rich kind of mogul kind of deciding who is essentially authentic, should be trusted, who's a journalist, who should be on there, who can say what and when. And again, I think it's just, for me, it's the journalism piece, and that's I think something we need to focus on more.
Jennifer, the other side has been discussed that other voices have been suppressed for years. And in fact, there've been coverage of that, many of it being associated with right-wing and right-wing press. What do you make of that, and whether or not we're deafening ourselves to certain sides of a conversation ever?
Yeah. I know, for one, I've been reading the Twitter files. I think it's problematic in how the information has come out, and that not enough journalists have had access to that. So we're getting kind of like, pieces of the stories, the kind of cherry picking, right? But for me, there's actually some insights in there. We have real cases into, how deeply connected the federal government was, and with the content moderation teams, that's concerning. But I know I was one of, maybe few out there raising alarms around what was happening around the New York Post when the Hunter Biden case came out. And it was a little bit of crickets out there. But for me, it was a case as to what is journalism. And I think that's showing up again. It's showing up again with, as you were saying, the suspension of, like Donny O'Sullivan at CNN and Ryan Mack at the New York Times. Like, they were reporting on this. And so, again, they didn't, hack any information. They didn't even compile this, this jet tracker, right? Like, but they were reporting on what was happening. So what is news? And, can they share a link to a New York Times story, that was, sharing that information? Or was it because it was in a tweet? I'm just not sure. So for me, it's really a question of, what is news? Who's a journalist? And are they being censored on there?
Citizen journalism, though, has, maybe it's the force of the crypto sphere as well, in large part working in tandem with this narrative of Elon Musk taking over Twitter. But it has been extraordinary that in some parts you have had direct access to Sam Bankman-Fried via Twitter Spaces in a way that never used to be the case, and journalism, sort of the journalists being cut out in some way. Where are we going to go to for our trusted sources going forward? Does Twitter still have a role to play, do you think?
Well, I've been questioning for a while, like, are the stock markets decoupling from the signals that used to be coming sometimes from data sets like Twitter, right? But when it comes to citizen journalism, I think that's, I would say different than having direct access to, like, somebody who's pitching an investment, right? Like, these are what we call sources. They're essentially news material. And until it's vetted by a journalist, it's really not news. So we have to remember that even in the case of a citizen journalist, they may not be even identifying as such. They may be just somebody who is there and some type of crisis happened and they happen to be pointing their camera at something. They should still be seen as a source. And I think that's some of the struggle with citizen journalism, is that, maybe there is not the same type of ethical grounding. But this even gets more discussion, I would say, what is the role of a citizen journalist? More than, say, who is somebody who's working for, like, state media, for example. So I'm going to just say one of the people that were suspended overnight worked for Voice of America. And I would say that we need to start remembering that that is funded by the United States government. So, there's like the free press over here, and then there's also something else happening on Twitter.
Yeah.
And for years that hasn't been labeled. So again, some people watching sports, and I'm just over here eating popcorn, being like, okay, USA media has been suspended. Did anyone notice? Okay, we got citizen journalists coming in. Okay, sure, but like, what is their role on this platform too? So, but for me, we have to remember the free press is what matters. And making sure it's healthy and that it's not being controlled and kind of gatekept by some type of rich overlord.